We are soon going to start our session. I would like to request everyone to please join us inside the hall. Okay, good afternoon everyone. We're going to start our another parallel session. I would like to welcome you all to another enriching parallel session. But before starting our parallel session, we have a special occasion planned over here. So we have a report that UNESCO has published recently, the report on targeting transformative disaster risk resilience in South and Southwest Asia. And we have a short report launch. For a report launch, I would like to request Dr. Sanjay Srivastav to the stage, Dr. Ratnakar Adhikari, Dr. Rupa Chanda. Thank you, Dr. Sanjay. Thank you, Dr. Ratnakar. Thank you, Dr. Rupa. I'm sure we are going to hear more about this report soon from Dr. Sanjay as well, doing his presentation. Without further delay, I would like to start this parallel discussion, parallel session. Starting this parallel session, I would like to invite as moderator, Dr. Sagar Prasai, Senior Advisor, the Asia Foundation, Nepal. We have a set of presentations scheduled during this parallel session as well. So I would like to call again Dr. Sanjay Srivastava, Chief Disaster Risk Reduction, UNESCO, Thailand. For another presentation, we have Ms. Aminat Sai, Assistant Director, the Maldives National University, Maldives. And we have a set of panelists to make this discussion fruitful. So let's call on our panelists to the dais. Mr. Anil Pokhrel, Chief Executive, National Disaster Risk Reduction and Management Authority, Government of Nepal. Dr. Safkat Munir, Deputy Executive Head, Sustainable and Resilience Program, Sustainable Development Policy Institute, Pakistan. Dr. Pulasthi Amar Singhe, Research Fellow, Institute of Policy Studies of Sri Lanka, IPS Sri Lanka. We have with us Dr. Savyasati Saha, Associate Professor, Research and Information System for Developing Countries, RIS, India. We also have Ms. Sakti Gurung, Executive Director, Center for Disaster Management Studies, Nepal. Before handing over the stage to our moderator, I would just like to highlight that this session has been supported by United Nations Economic and Social Commission for Asia and the Pacific Sub-Regional Office for South and Southwest Asia. With this, I would like to hand over the dais and stage to moderator. Thank you, sir.
My name is Sagar Prasai. I'm an advisor to the Asia Foundation. This session was designed to, the timing was from 4 to 5:45, an hour 45 minutes. We're starting about 15 minutes late, but it will be my effort to try to complete it on time with the help of the presenters and the panelists indeed. It's showing all signs of last session of the day, but we have a mesmerizing panel here, and they promise to keep you awake throughout. I will not go into introducing the panelists and speakers in the interest of time. Their detailed bios are given in the website, and you can access that. We have name cards in the front, so you know who they are. So the panel opens with 2 presentations, and then we'll have a set of 4 panelists, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 panelists, in fact. I think I have to pull the chair a little bit to at least establish face contact with the panelists. 5 panelists who will comment on this for 5 to 7 minutes each, and then we can open up the floor for questions and comments, and then the panelists can respond to that. With that, let me start with the presentations immediately. Let me invite Dr. Sanjay Srivastav, Chief, Disaster Risk Reduction, UNSCAP, Thailand.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, for this opportunity. I'm very, very happy that in this overall, the South Asia Climate Economic Summit, there is a room quite a big on adaptation and resilience, which is so critical for this region. Mr. Chair, I am happy that we launched this report on this occasion. This is a ISCAP flagship publication, Asia Pacific Disaster Report. At the request of the member country, that disaster risk in Asia Pacific are so diverse that we should have sub-region wise report as a follow-up on the main report. So risk in Pacific is completely different from the risk in Central Asia, and so in South and Southwest Asia. So this report is a deep dive of what was published in Asia Pacific Disaster Report. Particularly, we have zoomed in South Asia context. There are 5 key messages. I thought I will just come to you. Message number 1, which is, to be very frank with you, it's heartbreaking. The message is, this sub-region is world's most disaster impacted in terms of the human cost of the disasters. Nowhere the human cost is so high than in South Asia. This is quite clear if you look at the number of fatalities and also the affected populations. 2 million people, over 2 million people died in 5 decades in Asia Pacific. More than 1 million are only from South Asia. That shows the human cost. And as with the warming climate, this cost is likely to be increased further. So if I come, which are the killer disasters and what are their economic impact? So the killer disasters in this region have been tropical cyclone, earthquake, floods, and then the disaster in terms of impacting most of the populations are slow onset disasters, drought, desertification, land degradation. So if you see the numbers of damage, this is the actual number of damage from this region, $485 billion has been lost in last 5 decades by the disaster from this sub-region where you know the overall economy. I will come back a little later on this. But what is the point which I wanted to invite your attention is, with the warming planet, now it's already 1.5 degree. Copernicus has done actual measurement to demonstrate the warming has already happened. It's no more a climate scenario, it's a reality. So with 1.5 degree to 2 degree warming, you look at South Asia. We have a risk hotspots, multi-hazard risk hotspot, which used to be quite a bit at 1.5 degree warming. But when warming moves from 1.5 to 2 degree, you see the intensification and expansion of multi-hazard risk hotspots. So this sub-region is going to be the riskier with 2 degree warming. Now, if we see, in terms of the economic impact of the warming, today, it's, if you take 1.5 degree warming to 2 degree, it's a 240 billion annualized average loss. This is based on our econometric models. And with 2 degree warming, this will continue to rise. Some of the country, which is a bigger size of the economy, in terms of their percent of GDP, it's lower number, but the smaller size economy, disaster impacts are going to be quite a bit. It will have a knockdown impact in overall economic development. Another point which I wanted to flag was, which has been talked about all around the world, is climate-induced loss and damage. It's much more in this region. There are a lot of voices in the Pacific, in many other parts of the world, on climate-induced loss and damage. But when you take the overall loss and damage induced by climate change, it's those loss and damage which cannot be mitigated, it cannot be adapted, it cannot be managed. It has come across the generation. In this region, these are the irreversible impact of the climate change, which is sea level rise, glaciers melt, expansion of desert, desertifications, and so on. So looking at all this, where it has impacted the most impact is reflected in terms of SDG progress when you see in South Asia. SDG 13, which is all the time in regression. One reason for regressing SDG is we could not able to manage disaster impact. Of course, mitigation is another part, but disaster losses, which you have seen, including the one loss and damage, because of which the success of SDG from this sub-region and Asia Pacific overall is somehow jeopardized. Now, what to do to protect the people at risk? That's the key questions. In the report, we have flagged what is the most important interventions, particularly relevant in Asia Pacific. There are 4. Protect people at risk. This is what is in the hotspots. Economic cases of early warning for all. Investment, then sector-specific early warning system, and finally, nature-based solutions. Having flagged the issues and challenges, the report brings out 5 recommendations. Recommendation number 1 is simple adaptation is not enough. A stepwise adaptation will not make difference in the riskier times. We need to go for targeted adaptation. And targeted adaptation will have 4 components. In this region, it is more important that we should have a just transition to adaptation. Just transition in energy is quite a bit talked about. Just transition in adaptation is to protect the most vulnerable in multi-hazard risk hotspots. So for that, there are comprehensive risk assessment, focus from sector to system, and then technology and innovations, which are the key. So in this report, when you look at, because I'm happy I'm talking to the economist audience, we did some economics analysis, modeling, and look at the number. For example, if you see South Asia overall GDP, the size of the economy, $5.6 trillion, out of which 240 billion is annualized average loss. So it's a huge economy at risk. But to what extent it can be prevented? Our analysis says we can prevent to the extent of 48 to 72 billion per annum if we have put in place some of the key interventions, which includes early warning for all, not only to protect people but also to assets, the critical infrastructure assets. So this one intervention could save a very substantial amount of disaster impact in Asia Pacific region. But how to do it? It cannot be done unless we build on the adaptation technology. And there are 25% adaptation technology which are also common to the mitigation technology. There are 3 clusters of technology. One, science-based climate models. Second is innovative technology, that is critical infrastructure, civil engineering, huge water infrastructure. The third cluster is the data science and geospatial technology. The cluster 3 in the present context has become game changer in almost all the sector, and more so in early warning for all. I will flag one example which we have been doing in ISCAP. We developed a data portal called Risk and Resilience Portal, built on data available in the open source public domain, customized for the countries of the region. Then we used all the exposure data available from transport, energy, and variety of the sectors that ISCAP is dealing with. More importantly, SDG portal. Then we use risk and resilience analytics model to compute the impact. Then we came to artificial intelligence to quantify what we called impact-based forecasting. So if you see the pyramid of the infrastructure, it starts from data, goes to the AI. And what difference it can make? Just one example. Just one data platform is not enough. You need a multiple platform, capitalize on their synergy. For example, Risk and Resilience Portal with CDRI, Coalition of Disaster Resilient Infrastructure, GIRI platform, which is an infrastructure focus, put together can help in building resilient infrastructure in high mountain or in high risk area. Our fourth recommendation is unlock the potential of regional cooperation. This is something like a must in this sub-region. This is just one study I would like to flag, which had done the cost of non-cooperation in GBM basin, and which is a huge number. So this cost of non-cooperation, if you look at the sector, goes from water, energy, food, environment, and in terms of the cross-sectoral, it is a ecosystems and disaster risk reduction. Now, how to bridge this? It can be bridged. There are promising examples. One example I would like to flag is the WMO ISCAP panel on tropical cyclone. Cyclone used to kill tens of thousands of people in 70s, 80s, 90s. But now, situation has changed. The game-changing impact of cyclone is this regional early warning cooperation, plus all enabling technology. See, for example, the cyclone Mocha, which started from Sri Lanka, came to India, from India to Bangladesh, finally the landfall happened in Myanmar. Every time when the cyclone moves, you capture the people who are likely to be impacted by the cyclone, inform. This is what is called impact-based forecasting, and that helps in evacuating the people. Cyclone Biparjoy, India, Pakistan, Met agencies work together to quantify or to target the people who are going to be impacted on a different date of progression of cyclone Biparjoy, which was a very, very complex cyclone, a slow-moving cyclone, covered a vast area. So even if your disaster is complex, if you have a regional cooperation in place, high-end technology put into the action, you can make a difference. My last slide is the ISCAP examples of investing in regional cooperation. ISCAP Multi-Donor Trust Fund, over the years, it has spent $16 million on a regional cooperation, built institutions like RIMES, Regional Integrated Multi-Hazard. Many of the countries, including Nepal, Bangladesh, Maldives, Sri Lanka, beneficiary of the RIMES. Then we support the IUTWMS, Indian Ocean Tsunami Warning System. So this is an investment in regional early warning system. So all put together presents opportunity for transformative adaptation in South Asia. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Srivastav. We are in some ways bound to use, the official data on average temperature rises, right? So that's why we talk about 1.5 or sometimes up to 2.5. But what we're readily ignoring is the locational variations. And there are lots of episodic extremes in particular, landscapes like the high mountains and the cryosphere, which are expected to be much higher than the average temperature rise. And then there are compounding impacts, and then there are cascading impacts. So we're looking at fairly drastic scenario coming down the pike. If you thought about having a climate conversation in a conference that is essentially an economic conference, 20 years ago, that would probably not be entertained as an idea. But now we can't escape this. And I think this exemplifies, the crisis exemplifies in a more pronounced way in certain countries, in certain localities than others. And I think it's very apt that we look at Maldives now. Let me invite Ms. Aminath Shahi, Assistant Director, the Maldives National University, who will describe the case in Maldives.
Thank you, Swati, and all co-organizers and organizers, especially to UN Escape, partners and all stakeholders. Like I said, I'm glad to share insights on building resilience against climate risk in South Asia, while I'll be focusing more on the Maldives. As one of the most vulnerable nations to climate change, the Maldives faces urgent challenges like sea level rise, extreme weather events, and resource scarcity. Today, I'll highlight key data-driven insights on how the Maldives National University is contributing to solutions So, firstly, well, as we all know, that some objectives of capacity building includes, firstly, to enhance institutional and community resilience to climate impacts, to promote sustainable DRR by integrating innovative approaches and fostering collaboration, and also to support climate adaptation and mitigation through innovative and collaborative approaches. South Asia is one of the most disaster-prone regions globally, owing to its unique geographical and climatic diversity. This includes high vulnerability to natural hazards compounded by climate change, leading to increased risk from rising sea levels, changing monsoons, and extreme weather. The Maldives on the front line of climate change, facing impacts that threaten its very existence. Some key issues include storms. Storms, as global temperatures rise, storms are becoming more intense with stronger winds and heavier rainfall. These storms increase the risk of coastal flooding and infrastructure damage. Another is sea surge events, which is more frequent, and severe sea surge events have a direct impact on low-lying areas, causing saltwater intrusion into freshwater supplies and agricultural lands. Also, prolonged droughts are leading to critical water shortages affecting both communities and agriculture. Well, in January 2024, the Maldives experienced significant flooding in Thai Atoll, which also shows how these intensified events are no longer rare occurrences. When we look into the temperature, hazard trends of temperature, the baseline map 1981 to 2000 shows cooler average annual temperatures with much of the country in the blue range, below which is 27.5 degrees Celsius. The future projections near term 2021 to 2040 and midterm 2041 to 2060 under SSP2 and SSP3 scenarios shows a shift towards warmer temperatures, with the Maldives moving into high temperature ranges, oranges and red zone, which is indicated there. By the midterm SSP3 scenario, nearly all regions in the Maldives are projected to exceed 28.95 degrees Celsius. The temperature increase is uniform across all atolls, indicating that the entire country will experience similar warming trends. The coral reefs, a critical part of the Maldivian ecosystem, are highly sensitive to warming sea temperatures. Coral bleaching events become more frequent and severe as water temperature rise, threatening marine biodiversity and the fisheries sector. Mangroves and other coastal vegetation may also experience stress due to prolonged heat exposure. Tourism, the cornerstone of the Maldivian economy, could face challenges as higher temperatures may make the islands less appealing to visitors during peak heat periods. When we look into the sea level rise, future projections, which is near term 2021 to 2040 and midterm 2041 to 2060, under both the scenarios, which is SSP2 and SSP3 scenarios, shows a significant shift with the Maldives moving into higher sea level anomaly ranges, orange to dark red, exceeding 1.075 meters in some areas. Well, some of the implications to the Maldives, when we look into the coastal flooding, the Maldives' low-lying geography makes it one of the most vulnerable nations globally, with over 80% of its land area, while some islands are having, under, 1 meter above sea level rise. It's actually barely 2 meters above the sea level when we look into the whole of Maldives. Rising sea levels significantly increase the frequency and severity of coastal flooding, endangering communities, infrastructure, and the ecosystem as well. Higher sea levels will lead to actually permanent loss of habitat land, forcing internal migration and sadly creating climate refugees. Coastal settlement, including urban centers like Male, face significant risks. When we look into the ecosystem impact, coral reefs and mangroves, which serve as a natural coastal buffers, may struggle to adapt to rapidly rising sea levels, reducing their ability to protect islands from storm surges. Tourism, which relies on pristine beaches and marine ecosystem, will also face severe disruptions due to the coastal erosion and reef degradation impacting the Maldivian economy. When we look into the exposure level with the population aspect, some of the implications could be flooding risk, where increased precipitation heightens the risk of in-island and coastal flooding, particularly in densely populated areas. High precipitation levels could overwhelm existing drainage system, damage infrastructure, and disrupt daily life. Livelihood challenges, floods can directly affect local businesses and agriculture, key source of income for many communities. Well, the map highlights areas like Kashidu, Thoddu, and other such islands, which are known for agricultural activities as particularly exposed to higher rainfall levels. Around 86% of agricultural lands are expected to experience a 1.6 degrees Celsius increase in annual average temperature. Crops like papayas, bananas, and cucumbers, which are commonly grown in the Maldives, are sensitive to both excessive rainfall and high temperatures. Many Maldivian farmers rely on agriculture for their livelihoods. The dual threat of high precipitation and rising temperatures can actually lead to economic instability in farming communities. The map illustrates specific agricultural zones, areas such as Fiva, Fuamola, and Felivar, and other islands as such in the map, as particularly vulnerable due to their low elevation. The bar chart on the left shows the largest agricultural areas in atolls such as Lamo and Sino Atoll, which have significant land dedicated to farming. However, their vulnerability is heightened because much of this land is at or near the sea level. We can also point out some other challenges on resource constraints like financial limitations, technological gap, environmental degradation, the destruction of coral reefs due to climate change, pollution, and overfishing weakens the natural coastal defenses, increasing the Maldives' vulnerability to storm surges and coastal erosion. When we look into the current adaptation strategies, the Maldives has adopted several adaptation strategies to mitigate climate risks. Some include deploying early warning system for extreme weather, constructing seawalls and elevated infrastructure, and restoring mangroves and coral reefs as nature-based solutions. Community-led initiatives fostering local resilience through awareness and capacity building is also being conducted. These measures not only safeguard our commitment, but also enhance biodiversity and ecological resilience. Rising sea level pose a critical threat to the Maldives. We are addressing this challenge through Coastal Resilience Project and shoreline defenses as well, improve water security via desalination and rainwater harvesting. Also, climate-smart infrastructure that combines sustainability with disaster resilience. Some actions like these highlights our commitment to safeguarding our future amid increasing climate pressures. While we look at the MNU's role in building resilience, we have a risk and resilience portal which has been developed and which is being supported by the UN Escape. With a partnership with Escape, we have integrated the Risk and Resilience portal into the MNU website for local access as well. This is a central platform for data sharing and analysis to enhance local access to climate risk insights, which also integrates geospatial mapping and projections to guide decision making. With the joint project with Escape, development of geospatial data and advanced climate risk methodologies have been at work. Also, we had capacity building initiatives, both technical and non-technical stakeholders to foster informed decisions. Some key collaborations that highlight MNU's contribution to DRR include establishment of Geospatial Lab. This facility enhances disaster management by enabling advanced data collection, mapping, and stimulation using drones and GIS technology. Technical training workshops has been conducted, and MNU representatives actively engage in global platforms, facilitating knowledge exchange and strengthening partnerships. These initiatives demonstrate how academia can drive impactful practical disaster resilience efforts. Well, we as an education institute, we have, for the education and capacity building initiatives, we have relevant courses as well. We at MNU have programs like Bachelor of Science in Climate Change, Master Science in Geospatial Technologies, and various diplomas equip students with essential skills for addressing climate and disaster risks. These programs align with national priorities such as coastal management, disaster preparedness, and sustainable agriculture. For capacity building initiatives, we provide training for community leaders and technical experts. We host local and national events to share best practices as well. The Maldives Red Crescent also actively involves community in disaster risk reduction and climate adaptation through migrant support programs as well as disaster risk reduction and climate initiatives. They have conducted several initiatives and programs to serve the community and to promote community engagement as well. Well, data is the foundation of effective disaster risk resilience strategies, enabling us to assess risk issues, issue early warnings, and make informed decisions. In the Maldives, real-time data from the Maldives Meteorological Services is critical for monitoring sea level changes and issuing early warnings for tsunamis and as such, mitigating risks during seismic events. Satellite imagery and weather models are also used to forecast tropical storms and storm surges, improving preparedness and reducing the impact of disasters. Geospatial mapping by MNU has identified vulnerable areas to prone sea level rise and storm surges, guiding the prioritization of protective measures like seawall and nature-based solutions such as mangrove restoration. For countries like the Maldives, resilience is not a choice, but a necessity for survival. Despite this, significant data gaps remain. Addressing this requires expanding monitoring infrastructure for comprehensive coverage. Developing uniform standards will improve the accuracy and usability of disaster data across region. To bridge these gaps, there are several opportunities. Strengthening regional collaboration with neighboring countries can enhance data sharing on shared hazards like tsunami and so on. Advanced technologies can be employed for real-time monitoring and data collection. Capacity building initiatives are essential to train local authorities and communities in data analysis and disaster response strategies as well. Public-private partnerships also offer significant potential where tech companies can develop open access platforms for disaster management, ensuring that critical data is accessible to all stakeholders. While these opportunities exist, challenges such as financial constraint, limited technical expertise, and long-term risks like rising sea level, pose significant barriers. Addressing these requires innovative funding mechanisms, targeted capacity building programs, and robust governance framework to coordinate action and maximize resources. We all know that resilience building is not about survival, but also thriving in the face of adversity. Immediate and sustained efforts are essential, involving collaboration between government, international organizations, academia, and communities. By investing in disaster risk reduction, climate adaptation, and mitigation, we can create sustainable pathways for development and safeguard vulnerable communities. So, to conclude, I will say that together we can build a resilient and thriving Maldives and a more prepared South Asia. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Shahi. What the presentation essentially highlights is that our ability to accept failure has real serious consequences when we talk about climate change. But then there is a limit to what we can plan for, right? And there is also a limit to build the capacity to respond to adversity as human beings. And planning failures are very ubiquitous. They're available everywhere. I will readily admit that I may fail to end this panel on time. And so my request to the coming speakers is to limit your first response to about 5 minutes, and then we can come back for 3 minutes later. I will not have questions. I'm sure you've prepared your first statement on your own accord, but if you can reflect on what has been presented in terms of capacity and planning and the scenarios, and also in terms of giving it a little local flavor. This is a South Asian conference and we do have international panelists. The bearings, if they come from your own countries, I know Nepal is overrepresented here, but it would be interesting to the audience. With that, I will call upon Mr. Anil Pokhrel to go first, take his 5 minutes.
Yes, thank you, Sagarji. Thanks also to the host for, again, having me. And I'm really delighted to be, again, with this eminent panelists, scholars. As I head Nepal's National Disaster Risk Reduction and Management Authority, and I've been in this position for the last 5 years. Given that we only have like 5 minutes, I don't want to reveal my whole experience in 5 years in 5 minutes, but I want to kind of like take you to 2 incidents that we experienced this year, this monsoon. One is a case of a glacial lake outburst flood in the mountains, pretty close by Mount Everest. And so this is a tiny lake that just burst out. And I want to say again, where perhaps we could relate this to both the presentations made by Sanjay ji and Amina ji. The second one is more of a recent floods and landslides that hit Kathmandu, but also at the outskirts in these areas. We've never experienced such kind of floods and landslides. It's also clearly attributed by the World Weather Attribution, as this has been, there's a clear case of attribution of climate change. The science has clearly told us. So these are two case in points that I want to raise this and see where we kind of, this is a tiny lake, not even a lake, there's no word perhaps, a tiny lake would perhaps describe it. This is hardly of a size of an Olympic-sized swimming pool. This was not even considered within the radar or even worth to be considered for risk assessment. This is so tiny. For a reference, again, only if the size of the lake is nearly 2.5 times the size of an average size swimming pool, then only one would consider to be worthy of, again, assessing risk. So this was unattended, left behind. And so it burst out in the middle of a day and swept away a village called Thame. Further, a few kilometers downstream, it just disrupted the connectivity. The bridge is gone. This is the same area that, again, got hit by, further downstream, by the recent September end floods. You might have seen a bridge, one of those noted bridges, called a bridge in Khurkot that disrupted connectivity for quite a long number of time. We had to do a Bailey bridge in this. So there was no early warning system. Secondly, the risk assessment wasn't done. for this place, despite for the fact that, again, there's adjacent lakes that have bursted out in recent times, Dixo being the lake that got a global headline. For the first time, I guess it drew attention of scientists for the kind of impacts that it would bring through. There's also Chorolpa that's also brought in interest, just adjacent to the basin. But despite all this, again, we've not been able to really track the growth of these lakes, but more importantly, understand risk, especially in light to, again, the exposure and the vulnerability of these settlements. So we didn't really factor in, again, if the settlements, if the infrastructures are near the lakes, that would pose a higher degree of impacts. So this little fact, especially combining hazards with exposure and vulnerability, didn't exist, and I must admit that it still doesn't exist in this country, at least in Nepal. I can't say of other countries. And so this understanding of risk is so much limited, and so this is where a capacity building need is so much necessary, despite the fact that, again, we all know, again, climate change impacts, especially in the mountains, and especially on the glaciers and glacial lakes are such an imminent point of discussion. We're lucky this time because, again, it happened in the middle of a day. There's no early warning system. But the key question is, again, how do you now assess whether the 4 more lakes in those areas, whether these would still burst out, and is it safer enough for us to even build this community back at the same place? Our initial hunch is, again, we said no. But there's pressures, again, and so how do you balance it? And that's a critical question that we're grappling with. And so even if we do a resettlement, what kind of a building would make it sustainable? Would ferrying bricks and cement all the way from Tarai, building a Tarai-like a community up in the mountains would be a sustainable way? Perhaps, again, if there's enough electricity, we could heat those up or cool them down during summers. Is that the way? Is it going to create jobs? So I think that's the kind of questions that we're grappling with. So it kind of tells a telling story of what Sanjay ji has presented, and I clearly admit to all those 5 key messages that's gone. What's really a stark reality is these risk information are not within the government of Nepal ministries or departments domain as such, and so the data, having an open data system, and that too, again, sometimes we require transboundary data, sharing data between China, Nepal, Bangladesh, India at a regional scale is so much important. So I think it also kind of speaks to that volume. The second second incident and example that I want to share is the recent September floods. In the last 55 years, we've never seen this high level of extreme events. So for the reference, this is only kind of 331 millimeters overnight. We lost 268 people. 44 bridges got wiped out. The Kurkut bridge was just one example. We do not have resource to perhaps even build 4 bridges using our own financial allocation this year. The gap is something around 40 bridges. If we look at the entire monsoon season, we've lost around 80 bridges. There's a huge financial gap to just construct bridges and roads itself. So I use the word sankat, not only sankat, mahasankat yesterday during a mountain day event. And so there's a clear gap of, again, finances. The only way for poor countries like Nepal would be to resort to loans. There's no grants to support the reconstruction of these kind of projects, and so these facilities and infrastructures. Now, my key question, especially after this, is, again, there's a rush to really go ahead and then reconstruct the bridge exactly as it used to be. So would that pathway take us to a sustained way of doing development? And so the clear answer is no. Even with half of the amount of rainfall, I guess, we could perhaps see double the amount of impact from if it happens next year onwards. The reason it being, like, one of the areas that's fairly not understood and not measured and not quantified is understanding debris flow and the sedimentation in the Himalaya system. We've learned how to measure water, use it for designing our bridges or irrigation systems or other infrastructures or even hydropower. But in terms of understanding the debris flow and the sediment does not exist in Nepal and perhaps neither in South Asia alone. And so this dimension, almost 50% of the risk actually emanates from debris and sedimentation that's absolutely not quantified, not measured, not monitored. We don't have the capacity. Forget capacity. We don't even have the rightful agency or the institutions mandated to do that. And so this is where we stand in terms of really understanding our Himalayas, our mountain systems, and really using science information for making decisions in terms of designing our infrastructures, more importantly, and how do you really grapple with capacity building, bringing up a new generation of, again, planners, designers, engineers, to really deal with this risk. So with these questions, I'd rather end here and pass it to other colleagues to shed light on some of those experiences in the region. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Pokhrel. Mr. Pokhrel has headed the NDRRMA for quite a number of years now. And I think he's been witness to a variety of capacity failures. What he chose to mention here are definitely the tips of the iceberg, but they are very important tips. With that, let me go to Dr. Munir.
Thank you, Dr. Sagar. Dr. Sanjay has presented the report, which gives us a lot of data. And Dr. Sanjay has always been one of my mentors since I was in ESCAP building in 2011. So I have been learning from his wisdom on that. Whatever we have the lesson, whether from this report or the stock take we had in Dubai, and also other instrument like midterm review of the Sendai framework. And the fourth one in the series is the Global Humanitarian Overview, which has been released last week. So if you look at all the 4 reports, so we found that world has, off track of protecting people and infrastructure from disasters. That is the one punchline. That leads us towards what we need to do in terms of capacity. And the title says, sustainable disaster risk reduction, climate change adaptation, and mitigation. I will reverse the order. I will reverse the order because if we fail in mitigation, we end up in adaptation. And if we fail in adaptation and, DRR, we have to face loss and damage. I have amended the quote from Dr. Adil Najam, adding my thoughts as also including in that, which means we are somewhere not part of the climate justice debate. Because when you look at 900 million, 800 million people only in South Asia are facing disasters. So which means, the 1/5 of the population is really at risk. So we have to look at that at least there should be no climate hazards or zero climate hazard, which is a campaign of UNDRR also. So I just want to drop a couple of messages from that, which will actually help me wind up my point of view. There are a few things from the zero climate disaster. Number one thing is that, of course, the Sendai's 4 principles are the top priority for all of us. And if we are not even understanding disasters, then certainly we cannot understand climate hazard. We have to avoid that they should not become the disasters. So that's one thing we have to look at. Secondly, in terms of capacity building, if you look at the other thing, is that basic 3 things we have to look at to build our capacity. One is that helping the most at-risk people to adapt, to mitigate and become more resilient, investing in disaster risk reduction tools. And particularly, I will mention here the anticipatory approaches. In South Asia, Bangladesh, Nepal, India, and Pakistan, we have been advancing on the anticipatory planning and anticipatory things. Because, if you are looking at DRR, just like we have done with CCA, climate change adaptation, if we are again doing with the DRR also, then certainly loss and damage is our fate. So we have to have some sort of anticipatory approaches. Anticipatory approaches demand that people should be well prepared. So, the nature-based solution should be taught to them. The community should be empowered, not only through the foreign money or just only money, but their lifestyle, change in their lifestyle. For if we are preparing to face the disaster and we are spending $7. So why not putting $1 or $2 in anticipatory? And in anticipatory, what I mean is that there should be a ready cash available in anticipation of what could happen in 1 year or in 2 years or next 5 or 7 years. This kind of anticipatory kind of things we have to do if we really want to save our people or our infrastructure, which is at risk at the moment. So these anticipatory approaches, in Pakistan particularly, you know the dialogue platform. It is also good that despite all inactiveness of SAARC, we still have a dialogue platform on DRR. We still have a SAARC rapid response mechanism agreement. So that can be implemented on that way. On data, that's a very challenging thing because South Asia, right from the cryosphere to the sea, we have been in between and all. That's why all kind of disaster we have to face. If there is a temperature rise going on, there is heat waves, there are other mechanisms that are damaging us. So in that way, we have to have the data repository at the regional level. I am part of the CBM, between India and Pakistan Track 2 right now. We are working on at least 2 things, water and air pollution. These are non-political issues. If we go through that and if we have data repositories, then certainly we can sort out the data thing. I would like to quote here Indus Water Treaty is in between India and Pakistan. There is treaty between Nepal and India. So kind of these treaties, we should look at them. Despite our enmities or despite our political differences, these still exist and their channels still exist. Both on Indian side and Pakistani side, there are water commissioners. They regularly meet and discuss the water data situation. In September 2014, Pakistan could have avoided a big disaster because early warning came from India and data was shared. And that's why we could have, took people away from the route of the floods. So if we have anticipatory approaches, we have data repository with us and we take this data to the benefit of other, because climate change or water or air pollution, they do not see any border. Recently, because of the air pollution, we have seen in these 2 countries and even rest of South Asia, people have been having diseases of breathing issues were having, and more than 2 lakh people were died because of these diseases. So we have to save our people, and that should be the fundamental approach of our DRR, climate change adaptation and mitigation procedure. And that is why what we say, they should be sustainable. They cannot be sustainable unless our communities are empowered or they are trained. Our local governance system is strong at the local level. Secondly, the resources are not available at the local level. It's not that only we ask for foreign money, that if money will come from outside, we can solve. Within the region, we have expertise. For example, on the air pollution, we saw that India is ahead of other countries on fossil fuels treatment things. So we can replicate in other countries. The only thing is that we have to step forward, and beyond politics, we have to think about the people of South Asia. So that's my ending note, that we have to actually look at mitigation, adaptation, and DRR to the loss and damage. Otherwise, we cannot repair. With this brief, I'll be happy after any question. Thank you.
Thank you. Dr. Munir, you mentioned water treaties in South Asia, which is one of my favorite subjects. And there are over 6 dozen significant transboundary rivers, and we have all of 5 treaties. And all treaties are water sharing treaties, not water management treaties. And so, that sort of tells us how planned we are in terms of responding to climate change. Let me go to Dr. Amarasinghe now, who will bring the Sri Lankan perspective to the conversation.
Thank you for giving me the opportunity to talk about Sri Lanka and its challenges when it comes to disaster risk resilience. As a lab economist, maybe I can offer a different view or a slightly related view when it comes to the areas of health and education. So we talk about disaster risk resilience, but from Sri Lanka's perspective, a more realistic approach would be looking at some of the government targets, and these mostly come in education and the health sector. When it comes to the biggest climate challenge in Sri Lanka, it's the increasing frequency of disasters or floods or droughts. And they happen, it's quite uncertain, and in both the magnitude and the location. For example, let me talk about something that happens after rains in Sri Lanka. So in most cases, or after heavy flooding or after heavy rains, certain areas of the country, the central areas of the country, experience a high number of vector and waterborne diseases. So in this case, leptospirosis, also known as rat fever, is quite common in areas such as Ratnapura. And if you talk to medical professionals from that area, they would say that they don't have the necessary facilities to respond to this high number of cases coming from these regions, especially these gem miners in Ratnapura. And they simply aren't able to tackle this in a timely manner. And with leptospirosis, it's quite important that you recognize the disease early, because it can be quite fatal. But recently, due to this uncertain weather conditions, in Jaffna, in the northern area of the country, they have found this case of high cases of fevers in multiple places in Jaffna. And today that they have found out that these are actually leptospirosis cases. But the thing was, the medical systems in Jaffna are simply not equipped or don't have experiences with, different types of climate-induced health risks. So in this case, leptospirosis. And they simply managed to recognize this as an issue in Jaffna just today, which is quite fatal, because leptospirosis picks up quite quickly, and it affects your health very, very fast. So as you can see, the health sector in Sri Lanka, it needs to work with this disaster risk management of relevant authorities there to address issues in infrastructure, quick response, or preventing awareness when it comes to issues that have health risks that are often taking place after floods or rain. And not only that, the education system too, usually after flooding or rains, the education system takes a pause. It's not able to contact with the disaster management institutes in an effective way to make sure that students are able to continue their education. So these issues should also be part of building capacity when it comes to disaster resilience. And in Sri Lanka's case, these are probably the realistic approaches, because the government puts a lot of weight when it comes to education and health. Of course, there are, the government has identified this as an important issue. So the national policy plans have identified, the national adaptation plan has identified education, health, and food security, among other things, to be important issues when it comes to integrating climate responses or climate change, integrating climate mitigation, climate adaptation responses. But there is definitely room for improvement. There should be more coordination across these national policy plans to improve efficiency. There should be a better use of data and communication and coordination, both at the national level and the local level, and across disciplines, for example, with the disaster risk management and health professionals, or the government, the hospitals, or the education systems. For example, during COVID times, a lot of people used EdTech as EdTech efficiently to communicate with students and to make sure that the learning continues. So these are possible solutions that they can explore, and also bringing in the private sector. So private sector meaning private agents, especially in areas like Ratnapura, where there are high cases of leptospirosis after floods and rain. These are happening mostly because of gem miners in that area. So bringing in these landowners and to consider their profits. There is some common ground where you can work with these private agents to reduce and prevent these cases. So building capacity at multiple levels in these sectors, health and education mostly, that is a key way moving forward, especially in the Sri Lankan context.
Thank you very much. Listening to Dr. Amarasinghe, I feel like citing another quote from Dr. Adil. But Dr. Munir, I am not sure if your Dr. Adil and my Dr. Adil are the same people. I'm talking about Adil Nazam, who is now with WWF, if they're the same people. But he talks about age of adaptation with an epochal connotation, which is just the way historians have classified as Bronze Age or Iron Age, because the story of human life from henceforth is the story of adaptation. And it's very true that health, education, and food security are some of the first domains where the adaptation has to be sped up, because we're going to feel that very quickly. Let me now go to Dr. Sabyasachi Shah from RIS.
Thank you, Chair. First of all, my sincere thanks and congratulations to SOTI for organizing yet again this very important forum, the 15th South Asia Economic Summit, and also to ESCAP for facilitating our participation in this panel. Of course, the two presentations at the beginning of this session were very, very helpful in terms of laying the ground as to where we stand, the vulnerabilities, the heightened vulnerabilities of the region, and what needs to be done. And as one would see that these threats are of various kinds, and it would require, out-of-the-box thinking, imaginative thinking, some of it in our own learnings from how development policy actually works on the ground, our country-level experiences on how designing of policies are one aspect, and then implementation at the ground level is another one. So we need to draw upon our own experiences, perhaps to come up with reasonably acceptable solutions. And also the very elaborate representation from Maldives, which actually captures the unique challenges that not all countries face, but island countries and their specificities. That is important. The reference to CDRI came up in the presentation, and of course India over the years have emerged as as a solution provider on some aspects, because we do realize that the geopolitics of the day is difficult. We also realize that resources are not adequate, and then you need renewed efforts on global public goods and regional public goods. And I think in that respect, the vision with which the CDRI was launched back in 2019 is an effective platform, because financing is at the core, but what kind of financing? Because going forward, developing countries would massively build infrastructure, and that came up yet again in our discussion since yesterday, that when we see the development versus climate trade-offs, infrastructure plays a major role in that. So one way of looking at infrastructure is the multiplier effect that it brings in for economic growth, but also, as was highlighted yesterday, the definite challenges that it also brings. So creating resilient infrastructure, creating resilient urban infrastructure, mobility, multimodal transport, etc. So all of that requires the right kind of financing, and perhaps CDRI is one of the key solutions coming from the region. Having regional ownership, the design and template is important. It is encouraging that Afghanistan, Bangladesh, Bhutan, Maldives, Nepal, Sri Lanka, all are members of CDRI, and there is definite scope of leveraging complementarities of learning. And of course, there are other examples that we have talked in this session about the early warning systems, the disaster mitigation, which has helped. and also the challenges with not only climate but also public health challenges when we were faced with the COVID-19 pandemic, and how vaccines were in short supply, and how countries like India rose up to the occasion to support other countries on vaccines. These are important lessons. The other aspect that we need to be concerned about, and my previous speakers have already highlighted, is this whole idea of localization. If we, I did some, because of my work on SDGs, I was looking for how exactly the localization debates have evolved. And interestingly, if you go back to Agenda 21 back in 1992, it had a very strong agenda on localization, but eventual global compacts were almost silent on how localization takes shape. And no uniform principles, accepted principles could be discussed. But the experience of SDG implementation in this part of the world, although SDGs are a difficult proposition, whatever we talk about convergence, etc., is very difficult to achieve. But definitely the ideas on localization, and from my experience from the region, from the forums and the conferences that I have attended in Dhaka, Nepal, in all places, some of it are definite best practices and success stories. So it needs to come in when we talk about disaster resilience as well, because disasters affect locally. And at the same time, you need to have the scope to adjust your national level policies for local needs. So that freedom has to be there. And island countries, mountainous regions, forest-based communities, mining communities, everyone has their unique challenges, and the nature of the disaster they would face would also be very, very unique. So, localization would be a key agenda when we talk about capacity building, and it has to happen at a larger scale. One good thing about this region is that this region has talent and skills, though heterogeneous, though not equally distributed. The challenges of regional disparities persist, but definitely there is enough that we can do from pulling in our own efforts on capacity building, skills and knowledge, that would be very, very critical. And we have just discussed the importance of data and the preparedness towards data. And I would also like to, beyond the efforts that our statistical agencies put in, and the awareness that is already there, the public perception on data has to also change. We have been growth fundamentalists for long, but now eventually we see that, okay, growth is fine. In policy circles, we do talk about human development indices, but one particular index has become very popular that is air quality index, right, starting from Lahore to Delhi to Dhaka and the entire Indo-Gangetic plain. So we do see that people are becoming more and more aware. Well, when we talk about water quality, as ROs are not a solution, same for air quality, air purifiers are not a solution. So we definitely need to work together. We need collective efforts on this, and that should be something the region is capable of, and I should think that in the coming years we need to work more in this area.
Yes. Absolutely. I've had the pleasure of working in India with the Asia Foundation for 5 years, and I've witnessed that if you just compare the sheer number of organizations, the university departments that are working on subjects that are directly related to climate change in India, outnumber greatly compared to any other country. And that's a function of population and resources as well. But geopolitics are not, we're at least capable, or we are not incapable of learning from one another. And I think, conferences like these really help. But then these conferences also have thinned down over the last 3 or 4 years, and I don't know how to revive the frequency of interactions between South Asians. There is something called the SARC, but we'll have to see how that goes. With that, let me go to Ms. Shakti Gurung, who heads an organization that actually studies DRR. So it's all yours.
Thank you so much, sir, and thank you, Swati. and the SCAPE project for unpacking such an important recommendations, which is seen very similar to the context of Nepal, because we also feel similar kind of hazards, except cyclone here in Nepal, and we are also facing similar kind of challenges here in Nepal in the DRM efforts and climate change adaptation measures. Slightly talking about Nepal, like Nepal being a very highly sensitive to the climate change due to its diverse geoclimatic systems and the socioeconomic conditions, because it is not only the environmental aspect, there are several social aspects also that exacerbate the impact of the climate change in the countries like Nepal. And already we have seen in the report like 2-degree warming level, and it is very alarming for countries like Nepal because we have mountains, we have glaciers, that glaciers are shrinking, melting, and we are facing the glacier lake outburst flood like our CEO just shared of the Thame flood. So in terms of the recommendation shared by the project, like it is mentioned the disproportionate climate-induced loss and damage. It is not only in terms of loss and damage, because climate change disasters are disproportionately impacting various group of people in Nepal, because we have ethnic diversity, we have indigenous people, we have more than 90% of the population staying in the hazard-prone areas like river banks and landslide-prone areas. So this disproportionate impact, should be like the women and persons with disabilities are differentially impacted. Here in Nepal, like more than approximately 62% of the population, they heavily dependent on the agriculture. And the economy of Nepal is heavily dependent on the climate sensitive areas like tourism, forestry, and agriculture. And the study also mentions that 70% of the farmers are women in Nepal. So this climate change and climate change impacts, climate-induced disaster are heavily impacting the economic condition of the women, economic condition of the subsistence farmers, and economic condition of the people that are heavily dependent on the agriculture for their livelihood. So tourism is another area that is heavily impacted after COVID-19 in Nepal. Recently we had a big landslide and flood incidences. In last 5-6 months, I think more than 500 people lost their lives due to this water-induced disaster in Nepal. So all the roads are damaged, and in the Sinduli road, around 35 kilometers of the roads that were are heavily damaged, and this has disturbed the movement and the tourism also. So this is one of the very impacted area in Nepal. And the report also mentioned about the simple adaptation is not enough. This is very true, because in Nepal, at the very local level, we prepare local adaptation plan of action. All the local government, we have 753 local governments that prepared local adaptation plan in line with the national adaptation plan. And that local adaptation plans, one study says that only 15% of the local adaptation plans have considered the issues of the persons with disabilities in the adaptation measures. So these things should be like, it also linked to the desegregated data collection at the local level, because we need to have a desegregated data system of the people, of the women, of the elderlies, of the children, and the other marginalized groups at the local level. So for the need-based and tailor-made adaptation measures, data is very important, and this is a very challenging issue in Nepal also. And the report also realizes about the inclusive early warning system. In Nepal, we have a practice of the flood early warning system. Very few works have been going on for the landslide early warning and earthquake early warning. But the flood early warning is very well established in some of the major river basin of Nepal. And you see more practical action that organizations are working in collaboration with the DHM. And we have early warning information SMS system also for those who are residing in the flood-prone areas. So that early warning system is still a challenge, because it has not been able to reach all the people that are residing in the flood-prone areas. So the messages are delivered, and sometimes it is very important that the messages should be localized in the local language, and the people, they understand the messages and they act on those messages through their preparedness to the disaster. So this is also very important part I have seen that is relevant to the report. And in Nepal, like I want to share some policy progress. We have done a very progressive progress towards the policy formulation, because in Nepal, the constitution has provision the DRR, DRM under the jurisdiction of all three tiers of the government. And we have lots of national strategies and policies formulated. And we have a gender equality, disability, and social inclusion strategic action plan recently formulated by NDRRMA. Maybe CEO sir will share about this also. And we have a JC strategy and an action plan in climate change. So all these national policy strategies are in the process of localization. So for this instance, local government need capacity and resources to implement these strategic action plans at local level, and communities should be at the center of the disaster risk management and adaptation efforts. And regarding the technologies, Nepal has progressively doing some advancement in using the digital technologies in the disaster response efforts, but still like limited technological infrastructure at the local levels. It is very difficult because they have a very limited human resource in the local level government also, and sometimes they are a focal person. It's like a regular transfer from one municipality to another. This kind of challenges the local levels are facing, and we have a Bipod portal system also. So slowly this digitization and data system are progressing in Nepal, which will be very helpful for the disaster management works. And we have a risk-sensitive land use planning provision at the local levels, and local levels are preparing the risk-sensitive land use planning, and it is another challenge for the context of Nepal to implement that risk-sensitive land use planning, because most of the places are already settled, and it is very difficult that we, based on that land use plan, we ask people to leave those areas without providing any other safe locations. So this is another challenges Nepal is facing, and yeah, I would finish with this one.
Thank you. As much as I know about South Asian governance styles, we're not that tolerant of policy vacuums. We're pretty quick to make policy, but we're very tolerant of implementation vacuums. And so it's a policy-rich, implementation-poor environment that we work in. With that, I want to open the floor for questions and comments. As much as possible, kindly direct your question to a chosen panelist. If you can't choose a panelist to respond to it, I'm fine taking a broad question to all of the panelists too. But it would be nice if you could be more pointed in terms of who you're asking the question to. Yes, please.
Thank you, Director. I think it was a fascinating panel. Thank you very much. I have two questions for Mr. Srivastava. Thank you for elaborating the UNESCOP report. The first is, you make a conceptual distinction in one of your slides between unavoided and unavoidable devastations. So if you could just elaborate on what you mean by that. The second question is, in another of your slides, you mentioned about multi-hazard risk hotspots. So over time, do we see any trend in the configuration of the multi in the hotspot? So that's the second question. And Shobha, you mentioned about localization and in the context of the SDG implementation. So when you talk about localization, is it country specific, but or you also have in mind
sub-regional interventions also in terms of the challenges of implementing SDGs. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Any other questions, comments? We have somebody at the back there, and then over to the left.
Thank you. First of all, I congratulate all of them for an excellent deliberations. I have two queries basically, listening to all the speakers. The common thread is the data. That's what all of them they realize. Not all, some of them. So who is going to anchor the database? I would like to know that. Is it the Secretariat, South Asia, or SCAP? So somebody can tell us a little more. Second is when it comes to the disaster, what is the future plan? Do you have any master plan? Some kind of that countries will follow, or they will do that their national planning, like CDRI, the Coalition of Disaster Relief, Resilience, etc., etc. So I think it's yet to be very active in the South Asia region. So if somebody can tell us about it, what's the future plan there on the disaster front?
I mean, even if we don't go to a master plan, I think just the architecture around which we cooperate on disaster risk reduction between countries, that has become really crucial. Any other points? And then I can turn to the, yes, ma'am.
Oh, okay. Hi. Thank you, Dr. Persai, for a brilliantly moderated panel.
Many a slip between the cup and the lip.
Yeah, okay, hi. Yeah, and thank you to the presenters and the panelists. Forgive me, I also have two queries. Mr. Pokhrel mentioned that there's no recourse except for resorting to loans for the core resilient infrastructure building that we have, and we're just done with COP29, right? And I'm pretty sure everybody here knows about the disappointing sort of size of the quantum that was agreed upon. So now the majority of mitigation and adaptation funds are supposed to be done via loan mechanisms. So I just wanted to ask Mr. Pokhrel about, as a representative of the government, what sort of insights can you lend on the government's perspectives on future financing, and whether they're completely as bleak as us having to completely rely on loans for the vast majority of our resilient infrastructure. And for the scholars in the panel, I wanted to ask about your experiences on basically formal and informal platforms and connections that you have with policymakers, and how you feel about your ability to leverage the research that you have and you are planning in order to create domestic, regional, and international pressure for increased grant-based finance for data and other mitigation and adaptation plans. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. We have exactly 15 minutes to bring this session to a screeching halt. So I recommend that we take a minute to 2 minutes if it is a long response. Starting from you, sir.
Thank you, sir, and thank you for a very direct question. I am very happy that you asked these nuances between unavoided and unavoidable. This is a term which came from loss and damage negotiations from 1991 onwards. Unavoided means basically the one which you had no capacity. Disaster hit and you could not able to manage or reduce. because of the lack of capacity, lack of the resources. That's unavoidable means you cannot do anything, like sea level rise, for example. Glaciers melt. There are global phenomena beyond you. So these are the distinctions that came from the loss and damage negotiation. Coming to multi-hazard hotspots, actually in today's context, particularly with the warming, let us say 1.5 degree, it's a hazard that already exists, hydrometeorological hazard. Now, what is called complex cascading and compound hazards. So with 1.5, there are also health-related epidemic, which gets triggered with warming in a cyclone-prone area, flood-prone area, you know. So it's a hazards which interacts and creates another hazards, health hazards. And multi-hazard also, like in a place, you have floods which triggers landslides. Tropical cyclone triggers floods, landslides, so series of hazards. So there are places quite a bit where you see not one hazard. One hazard due to the interaction with another hazards create third, and then hazard triggers another hazard. So those hot spots are quite a bit in South Asia, many. So most of the capacity, I'm happy I'm talking in front of the legendary colleagues like Pokhrel Sahab, capacity of the government, if it has to manage single hazard, there are some level of maturity developed in the South Asia. But when it becomes multi-hazards, one hazard triggers another, another triggers the third one, this is where our understanding of hazard, risk, vulnerability goes, you know, becomes obsolete. You need to deal with a very complex situation. So I think I have responded about the data CTRI platform, just few examples. Yes, this is what is like called the game changing of digital, the data science. Many agencies are now trying to populate data. CDRI is one such which has a GIRI portal. You know, before GIRI was introduced by CDRI, there was no estimate of what is the cost of infrastructure resilience globally. The team CDRI led by Andrew Mascari, they could able to come out a probabilistic assessment. If you had to build energy infrastructure in Nepal in a high risk area, how much it will cost. So that's a very important part. Of the portal of ISCAP, risk and resilience, it provides you a downscaled risk analytics based on CMIP6, the most updated climate model. So two platforms together fill in the data of estimating cost of adaptation by the countries when they develop their national adaptation plan. And platform, yes, that's, I think I have responded to the question. Thank you very much. Yes.
Would you like to share your thoughts at this point? Or you can pass the mic to your fellow speaker.
Actually, one of the audience has talked about research. So, since I'm from the Maldives National University, I would like to state that we do conduct research internationally as well, within the local perspective as well. So since Bali, Maldives is 2 meters above the sea level and some islands are with around 1 meters above the sea level, we do conduct some research based on the Maldives context as well. We partner with some international institutes as well to conduct research on similar perspective as well. So yes, since the question was about research, if more research is to be conducted, yes, we need to conduct more research so that we will know about the various aspects within the international level as well, sub-regional aspects as well. Thank you.
Thank you. I think there's one question to me. I have a karo ya maro situation with me right now. And so what it really means is out of these 80 odd breezes, I think jointly with Ministry of Finance and and Ministry of Physical Infrastructures, we could collectively raise finances through a mix of loans, $150 million from a CAT-DDO financing instrument, and then perhaps restructuring a bit of our own allocation. So with that money, I might be able to really think of building 20 breezes, if on a best case scenario, on a business as usual scenario as well. But if I really want to, if I could really kind of make my Ministry of Finance, but also our politicians and Ministry of Physical Infrastructure convince them, I might want to go to a disaster and climate resilient pathway for building these breezes, which means perhaps I might only be able to build 10 of those. My breezes would be perhaps a bit more cost needed for doing those resilience building on it. I usually take this example of, again, the breeze in Melamchi Bazaar versus the breeze in Mungling, which is the one in Melamchi was a flatbed with two spans, one pier in the middle, whereas in the one in Mungling, it's also a mountain setting. It's a mesa arc that you might see across in TikToks or your videos, especially the ones that are built in China, like really connects those two mountains. So I think, again, bridging these communities is really important, and so restoring connectivity. So I think I could only kind of do perhaps 10 in a best case disaster resilient infrastructure kind of design. That would be an ideal scenario. But for the rest, Marowala communities is for them to again look at autonomous adaptation, wait for perhaps 3, 4, 5 years, and so look at other finances. So this is where perhaps autonomous adaptation, they would perhaps resort to using floating devices or something. It's going to really halt their economy, their growth, their resilience. I think that's a situation that we are already at.
Thank you. Now there is no question directly to me. But in this discourse, I think we have to recall again and again what we need is that the capacity in terms of people's capacity, resources, and resources of finances. And we don't need anything bulk. We need forecasting-based things. If we are not forecasting or anticipating, then all of your resources may not be working. Even finance, if it is a forecast-based, modeling-based, then certainly we'll be knowing what is needed for our future. And for that, I think by 2027, there is a call that protection for all. And for that only in next 5 years, we need $3 billion for South Asia. So this sort of amount either should come through our own resources, which is not impossible, I guess. But of course, we are connected to other funding mechanism, and climate finance is one of the hope, but that could not be coming up in a way which we were expecting before COP29. But anyway, we have to have ready with our data sets for this planning, forecasting planning, even if we are going for funding appeals. Our data collection should be gender segregated. It should be allowing if people are living with disabilities, then they should be part of it. And in an earlier session, when we were talking about gender, there was a transgender thing. They are left out. So nobody should be left out in our discourse for resilience building or our disaster-related risk reduction. Thank you.
Yeah, so I'll keep it short. Just to make 2 points. One, based on what Dr. Munir said. Inclusivity in terms of considering socioeconomic conditions as part of the climate risk assessment is definitely needed, which means you do bring in climate mitigation, adaptation, and disaster risk resilience as a cross-cutting theme in most of the work that we do. And to maybe make a point on the formal, informal methods to get the adaptation and mitigation responses through. So one place to start could be making sure that there are networks around the research, the information, basically the dissemination we do to improve coordination with different stakeholders, whether it's health professionals, disaster risk management, policymakers, and to improve, to make sure that the coordination also reduces duplication of efforts, to really increase the efficiency when it comes to improving adaptation. That would be one way we can contribute, I think, as researchers.
So on the question of localization, there are two parts of it. Of course, at the country level, we now have experience of localization, which is not only about how efficiently local governments function or deliver on policies or programs of the government, but also how you encourage citizens' participation, community participation, civil society partnership, etc. So, which I see a positive shift for the region, and it's happening in every country. So there is definite results out of it, and also with the strengthened data capacities, it is helpful for localization. So that kind of transition is happening. When it comes for the in the context of the sub-region, and particularly as we are talking about disaster resilience, preparedness, etc. We do realize that on either side of the international border, the ecosystem remains similar. So the way the communities would get affected would be more or less similar. So there is, scope for, ideas and knowledge sharing, perhaps, on how community resilience can be built across regions, particularly if we talk about India, Bangladesh, Sundarbans, etc. I know a lot of research in India is happening on mangrove restoration, very positive interventions, first piloting those ideas, then scaling them up, and very good results on the Indian side of the Sundarbans. So there is a lot of scope for knowledge sharing on some of this. And the question, I think there was a question from the floor as to how policymakers respond to some of these ideas. Again, there is a definite shift to which at least in my experience, the way policymakers react these days on some of these ideas. First of all, they are very keen on implementation because, unless there are results or outcomes, so from outputs to outcomes and all those things, those are becoming more popular. But they are also keen on having indicators because at the end of a 5-year political cycle or otherwise, you really need to focus on what you have achieved. So policymakers are, earlier it used to be only devolution of funds and resource allocation, but now it is more and more about what kind of indicators you have for monitoring local level implementation.
Thank you. Question not directly related to me because it is well responded by our CEO from NDRRMA, but I just want to share about the Nepal context. The CSO's movement here in Nepal is very strong. We have a national platforms, national networks, the NGO federations that strongly advocate with the policymakers for the evidence-based negotiation during the international like COPE and APMC DRR, and these alliances, networks strongly work with the policymaker, with NDRRMA also to develop the position paper for the country. And CSOs are strongly advocating, with the policymakers to access more and more green climate fund and adaptation fund, loss and damage funds also. And regarding the intention of the policymakers, like at the local level, what we have observed is they are very, like a colleague said, they are very keen to the implementation, but they need the capacity and the resources. And especially I want to highlight the elected women representatives in the context of Nepal local level. They are very much motivated, but still the inadequate capacity regarding the policy formulation process, regarding the climate change, the knowledge and understanding of the DRR and climate change is very essential at this moment in terms of Nepal's local level policymakers. Thank you.
Mike has traveled.
I surely don't have the ability to summarize this conversation, which has gone on for about an hour and 45 minutes. But I will say that we know enough about what to do around mitigation. Whether we do it or not is a different story. But when it comes to adaptation and DRR, there are lots of unknowns. And in fact, I'm reminded of Donald Rumsfeld, the US Defense Secretary, who, before taking his country to war, he said there are known unknowns and unknown unknowns to tackle here. I think we are in a situation like that, but we are also in that situation where it is indeed koro ya moro. So we have to keep doing whatever we're doing from our respective places. Thank you very much, all the panelists and this audience which has stayed steadfast all along. Thank you very much.
Okay. Thank you, Dr. Prasai, for this wonderful moderation. I would just like to request all the panelists and moderator and presenters for a group photo op. All the discussions were truly inspiring, and the diversity of perspectives that has been shared were immense. Tomorrow, we still have one more plenary and 4 more parallel discussions to be held. I hope to see all of you tomorrow as well. We'll start at 9 o'clock. The plenary session starts at 9 o'clock, and then after that, we have 4 parallel sessions throughout the day. Thank you. And we have dinner as well. So I want to request all of you to stay back. Our dinner actually starts from 7 to 9. Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.